The story begins not with the silence of death, but with the deafening roar of industrial progress and the patriotic clamour at the docks of Greenhithe, England, in May 1845. The ships HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were not mere wooden vessels. They were floating fortresses, former war bomb vessels adapted with the highest technology the British Empire could forge. Their hulls were reinforced with double layers of oak and lined with iron plates on the bow, designed to crush the frozen barriers of the north. For the first time, human audacity brought steam locomotive engines to the ocean, allowing these mechanical beasts to sail against the wind, heating the interior with a piping system that promised comfort amidst the white hell. Sir John Franklin, an ice veteran, commanded 128 men who believed, with the typical arrogance of the Victorian era, that nature would bow before naval engineering. However, the Arctic is not an adversary to be fought with iron and steam. It is a patient entity, vast and indifferent to human ambitions. When the ships entered the labyrinth of Canadian archipelagos, the geographical trap was set. The summer of 1846 did not bring the expected thaw, and the subsequent winter descended with biblical fury. The ice, which was supposed to be only a temporary obstacle, became cement, solidifying around the hulls in the Victoria Strait. There, time stood still. The optimism of blue uniforms and golden buttons began to be eroded by the static reality of a horizon that did not change, where the sun disappeared for months, and the only sound was the groan of timber being crushed by the geological pressure of an ocean that refused to be liquid. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, it is necessary to visualize the hostile geography that sealed the expedition's fate. They sought the mythical Northwest Passage, a commercial shortcut that would link the Atlantic to the Pacific, but sailed directly into a climatological dead end. The fateful decision to bypass King William Island to the west placed the Erebus and Terror in the path of a massive current of ancient ice, multi-year blocks descending through the McClintock Channel like a slow-motion avalanche. Unlike seasonal ice, which melts and fragments, this barrier was solid, thick and relentless, transforming the sea into an impassable white continent. The geography there is not just scenery, it is the main antagonist. The place where they were trapped is a polar desert where magnetic orientation fails, and the land blends with the frozen sea, creating perpetual disorientation. The reason for those crews' existence, which was to map and dominate, was suddenly inverted. They ceased to be explorers and became prisoners in a cell without walls. The isolation was absolute. Without radio, without satellites, light years from any possible rescue. The flat and monotonous topography of King William Island offered little protection against the katabatic winds that swept the surface, dropping temperatures to levels where exposed skin freezes in seconds. They were stationed at the gateway of a planetary freezer, trapped at a latitude where biology struggles to exist. Geography dictated that there would be no escape by sea. If they wanted to survive, they would have to defy naval logic and walk upon the solidified ocean, a task for which their incomplete maps and their reliance on steam technology offered no preparation or real comfort. While the ice gripped the hulls outside, a much more insidious and invisible enemy was infiltrating the bodies of the men inside the heated cabins. Daily life on board, during the second winter trapped, transformed into a claustrophobic sensory nightmare. The darkness was constant, broken only by oil lamps that cast long and dancing shadows, feeding the melancholy. But true death was hidden in what should have sustained them: the food tins. The provision of canned goods, a recent innovation hastily supplied through Stephen Goldner's contract, was sealed with lead solder applied negligently and excessively. Drop by drop, meal after meal, lead accumulated in the tissues, bones, and crucially, the brains of the crew. Before real hunger attacked, heavy metal poisoning began to take its toll. The symptoms were subtle at first: abdominal pain, a metallic taste in the mouth, grey lines on the gums. Soon they evolved into chronic fatigue, irrational irritability, and paranoia. Naval discipline, rigidly maintained with Bible readings and classes for the crew, began to unravel under the weight of minds clouded by the neurotoxin. The environment, saturated with the smell of coal, unwashed sweat, and disease, became an incubator for madness. Robust men wasted away not for lack of calories, but because their bodies were being shut down from the inside out. Tuberculosis and pneumonia found fertile ground in devastated immune systems. The terror aboard HMS Terror was not just the fear of ice, but the terrifying realization that one's own mind was betraying every sailor, creating ghosts where there were only shadows and turning camaraderie into mutual suspicion as they awaited a spring that, in their poisoned hearts, they knew would never arrive. With the death of Sir John Franklin in June 1847, command fell to Captain Francis Crozier, an experienced Irishman, but now overwhelmed by an impossible situation. In April 1848, after 109 men survived 3 Arctic winters, Crozier took the ultimate decision: to abandon the ships. What followed was a tragic demonstration of the Royal Navy's rigidity colliding with the raw necessity of survival. The organization, which had been the backbone of the expedition, became its Achilles heel. As they disembarked onto the ice to begin a march toward the Back River, hundreds of kilometers to the south, the men did not take only vital supplies. They dragged heavy boats mounted on oak sledges, loaded with absurd and useless junk: silver cutlery with the officer's crest, mahogany writing desks, religious books, silk slippers, and polished brass buttons. Each sledge weighed hundreds of kilograms, requiring the Herculean effort of men already debilitated by scurvy and lead. This image is the definitive portrait of imperial hubris, the refusal to abandon symbols of civilization and status, even in the face of imminent death. They attempted to impose the order of a London dining room upon the desolation of the Arctic. Crozier, struggling against his own physical deterioration, tried to maintain cohesion, but the power structure was doomed. Dragging those boats over jagged ice ridges under biting winds and temperatures of 30 degrees below zero was not a strategic march. It was a slow-motion funeral. The meticulous organization turned into a ritual of suffering, where the dignity of the uniforms and the hierarchy of the ranks served only to prolong the agony of bodies that had already given up the fight. The final march southward is one of the darkest chapters in the history of exploration. As the days passed and calories ran out, the facade of civilization completely collapsed. Scurvy reopened old healed wounds, caused teeth to fall out, and stained the skin black and purple, turning young sailors into spectral figures. The tension between the hope of rescue and the certainty of the end created a rupture in the collective psyche. Groups split up, some returning to the abandoned ships in a delusion of safety, others falling where they stood, quickly covered by the all-erasing snow. It was at this stage of absolute despair that the last human taboo was broken. Reports from local Inuit and modern forensic analysis of bones found on King William Island confirmed the unthinkable: cannibalism. Cut marks on long bones and skulls indicate that, in the madness of extreme hunger, the flesh of the dead was consumed by the living in a futile attempt to gain a few more hours of life. The contrast is visceral and terrifying. Men who left England as heroes of science and Christian faith were reduced to the most primitive state of existence. The Arctic's white silence witnessed the final degradation, where rank, honor, and morality evaporated before the biological instinct for survival. There was no glory at the end, only the howl of the wind and the horror of acts committed under the insanity of starvation. The march led no one to salvation. It scattered a trail of corpses and imperial relics across miles of frozen wilderness, a macabre monument to human fragility in the face of untamed nature. For almost 170 years, The final fate of the Erebus and the Terror remained shrouded in myths and speculation, guarded only by the oral tradition of the Inuit, whose testimonies were historically ignored by Western searchers. It was only in 2014 and 2016 that modern technology, guided by these same ancestral stories, located the preserved wreckage in the icy and shallow waters. The underwater images are haunting. The ships are almost intact, upright on the seabed as if they were ready to sail again. Cannons, plates stacked on shelves, boots and wine bottles remain where they were left, frozen in time. This discovery did not only bring wood and metal to light, but validated the suffering and narrative of those who perished. The technical mystery has been resolved, but the emotional weight persists. The HMS Terror and HMS Erebus are not just archaeological shipwrecks. They are time capsules that hold the echo of human ambition confronted with its own mortality. They remind us that technology, however advanced it may be, is fragile in the face of the planet's elemental forces. Today, we look at these submerged hulls not with judgment, but with a reverent awe for the resilience and horror that those planks witnessed. The story of the Franklin expedition transcends the Victorian era. It speaks of the limits of endurance, the fallibility of leadership, and the overwhelming power of nature. If the coldness of this account touched you, and you wish to continue uncovering the deepest and darkest mysteries of human history, subscribe to the channel now. Leave your comment on which other historical tragedy we should reconstruct together, and share this video so that the memory of these men is not again buried by the ice of oblivion.